The massive space station hung in the void like a crystal palace made of light and metal. Commander Jake Morrison pressed his face against the transport window and stared at the incredible sight. The Galactic Council station was bigger than any city on Earth. Towers twisted upward in impossible spirals while bridges of pure energy connected floating platforms. Ships from dozens of alien worlds docked at ports that defied human understanding of physics. Jake had dreamed of this moment for years. Today would mark humanity's first formal request to join the Galactic Alliance. After decades of preparation, Earth was finally ready to take its place among the stars. At least that was what Jake believed as he straightened his dress uniform and checked his appearance one last time. Dr. Lisa Carter floated beside him in the zero-gravity transport. She was studying her tablet filled with notes about alien psychology and culture. Lisa had spent her entire career learning about the 12 species that made up the Council. She knew their languages, their customs, and their histories. If anyone could help humanity make a good impression, it would be her. Captain Ryan Burke piloted their small diplomatic shuttle with steady hands. He was a career military officer who had volunteered for this mission because he believed in humanity's future. Among the stars, Ryan had seen the reports of alien technology. He knew what joining the Alliance could mean for Earth's defense and exploration capabilities. The three humans represented the best of their species. Jake was a skilled diplomat who had resolved conflicts across Earth. Lisa was a brilliant scientist whose research had helped prepare for first contact. Ryan was a decorated pilot whose courage had saved countless lives. They carried the hopes and dreams of 8 billion people. Their shuttle docked with a soft thump. Jake felt his stomach flutter with nervous excitement as artificial gravity took hold. The airlock cycled open and they stepped into a corridor that seemed to stretch forever. The walls were made of some kind of living crystal that pulsed with soft light. Strange music drifted through the air along with scents that reminded Jake of flowers he had never smelled. A figure approached them from the far end of the hall. It walked on 6 legs and had skin that shifted colors like oil on water. This was their escort, a member of the Vorthak species. The creature spoke through a translation device that made its voice sound mechanical and hollow. Welcome, humans. I am Guide Anthrak. The Council awaits your presence. Follow me and do not touch anything. Many of the surfaces here are not designed for primitive nervous systems. Jake bit back his first response to being called primitive. This was diplomacy, and diplomacy required patience. Lisa had warned him that some species considered humans backward. Their escort led them through corridors filled with wonders that made Jake's head spin. Walls showed moving pictures of distant worlds. Floors that looked solid rippled like water under their feet. Plants that might not have been plants at all reached toward them with curious tendrils. Other beings moved through the station with the casual confidence of those who belonged here. Jake saw creatures made of living metal and beings that seemed to be made of pure light. Some floated without any visible means of support, while others walked on surfaces that his eyes insisted were walls or ceilings. The council chamber was a vast sphere, with the seating arranged so that all 12 species could see each other clearly. Each delegation sat in an environment suited to their biology. The Aquari floated in spheres of water. The Parathi sat in pools of molten rock. The crystalline ones grew directly from the chamber walls like living gems. Jake took his place at the speaking podium in the center of the sphere. His voice echoed as he began the speech he had practiced 1,000 times. The translation systems carried his words to every species in their own language. Honored members of the Galactic Council. I am Commander Jake Morrison, representing the people of Earth. We come before you today to request membership in the Galactic Alliance. Humanity has much to offer and much to learn from our galactic neighbors. He went on to describe human achievements in science, art, and culture. He spoke of their desire for peace and their commitment to cooperation. Jake painted a picture of humanity as a species ready to join the galactic community as equals and partners. When he finished speaking, the chamber fell silent for a long moment. Then Supreme Chancellor Vextar of the Corvani rose from his crystalline throne. The alien was tall and thin, with skin that looked like polished stone. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority. We have observed your species for some time, human. We have studied your history, your behavior, and your nature. The Council has reached a unanimous decision regarding your request. Jake held his breath. This was the moment everything depended on. Humanity is classified as a primitive, fear-based species. Your history is filled with violence, warfare, and territorial aggression. You destroy your own environment and fight over resources that could be shared. You are driven by emotions that have no place in civilized galactic society. The words hit Jake like physical blows. Around the chamber, he could see alien faces showing expressions he interpreted as disgust or pity. Chancellor Vexitar continued his devastating judgment. Your literature celebrates violence. Your entertainment glorifies conflict. Your governments are built on the assumption that other humans cannot be trusted. You have not evolved beyond your animal instincts. You react to every challenge with fear and aggression. Dr. Lisa Carter tried to interject. She began to explain human psychology and the complexity of human emotions. She spoke of love, compassion, and sacrifice. She described how humans had learned to overcome their fears and work together. Her words were cut short by a dismissive gesture from the Chancellor. We have seen these arguments before from other primitive species. They all believe they are special. They all think they have something unique to offer. But the evidence speaks for itself. Your species is not ready for galactic civilization and may never be ready. The formal vote was a mere formality. Each species cast their decision into the record. 12 votes against humanity, 0 votes in favor. The rejection was complete, and absolute. Captain Ryan Burke clenched his fists as the implications became clear. Humanity would be denied access to galactic trade routes. They would be cut off from advanced technology and scientific knowledge. Earth would remain isolated in its small corner of space. As they left the council chamber, Jake felt the weight of failure crushing down on him. 8 billion people had placed their trust in him, and he had failed them completely. The galaxy had judged humanity and found them lacking in every way that mattered. The journey back to their shuttle passed in stunned silence. Jake replayed every word of his speech, looking for mistakes he might have avoided. Lisa stared at her research notes, wondering how she had misunderstood alien psychology so completely. Ryan focused on his piloting, trying to control his anger at the dismissive treatment they had received. Their small shuttle detached from the massive station and began the long journey back to Earth. Behind them, the Crystal Palace continued its eternal dance among the stars. It would welcome many species as new members in the years to come, but humanity would not be among them. Jake activated the communication system to send their report back to Earth. He would have to tell the world that their dreams of joining galactic civilization had been rejected. Humanity would remain alone among the stars, judged too primitive and too dangerous for civilized society. The irony would not become apparent for many months. The very traits that the Galactic Council feared in humans would soon prove to be their salvation. But for now, all Jake could do was carry the bitter news home to a world that had dared to dream of something greater. 3 months had passed since the bitter rejection at the Galactic Council station. Earth had gone back to its isolated existence among the stars while the rest of the galaxy continued without them. Commander Jake Morrison spent his days writing reports that nobody wanted to read. Dr. Lisa Carter buried herself in research about alien psychology, trying to understand where they had gone wrong. Captain Ryan Burke flew routine patrol missions around Earth, wondering what might have been. Then everything changed in a single terrifying moment. The Deep Space Monitoring Station on Luna picked up the signals first. Dr. Lisa Carter was working, late in her laboratory when the emergency alarm began to sound. She rushed to the main communication center where dozens of scientists and technicians were staring at their screens in shock and confusion. The signals were coming from the edge of the galaxy where no known civilization existed. They were not like anything in the database of alien communications. These transmissions were cold and mechanical, with mathematical patterns that hurt to think about. There was no emotion in them, no warmth, no sign of biological origin. Director Sam Collins ran the monitoring station with calm efficiency, but even he looked shaken as he briefed the gathered staff. The signals had appeared suddenly, as if massive ships had just materialized in empty space. Long-range sensors were detecting energy signatures beyond anything they had ever recorded. Whatever was out there was bigger and more powerful than entire star systems. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine as she listened to the intercepted alien communications. The galactic species were in complete panic. The Zeltharians, who could read minds across light years, were screaming about creatures with no thoughts to read. The Corvani, who controlled matter at the quantum level, were reporting that their technology simply stopped working. The Nexari, who manipulated time itself, found their abilities completely useless. The creatures emerging from dark space were called the Void Hunters by those who managed to escape their first attacks. They were ancient machine intelligences that had been sleeping in the empty spaces between galaxies for millions of years. Now they were awake and hungry for the energy and matter that made up living worlds. Captain Ryan Burke was on patrol duty in the outer system when the first refugee ships appeared. His vessel, the Defiant, was a small military cruiser designed for escort missions and system defense. It was nothing compared to the massive alien ships that came limping through human space, seeking shelter from an enemy they could not fight. The first ship Ryan encountered was a Nexari colony vessel that had been fleeing for weeks. Its elegant curves were scarred by weapons that seemed to cut through space itself. The ship was broadcasting distress signals in a dozen languages, begging for help from anyone who would listen. Ryan had never seen aliens show fear before. During humanity's diplomatic mission to the Council, the alien species had seemed so confident and superior. They treated humans like children who might someday grow up to join adult society. Now these same beings were running in terror from something they could not understand or defeat. The Nexari captain was a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline shell. When Ryan brought the survivors aboard his ship, he could see the alien was barely holding itself together. Through the translation system, the Nexari spoke of machines that consumed entire star systems in hours. It described weapons that ignored all known laws of physics and defenses that adapted to any attack. Dr. Lisa Carter arrived on the Defiant within hours of the rescue. She needed to interview the survivors and learn everything possible about this new threat. What she discovered filled her with a dread deeper than anything she had ever experienced. The Void Hunters were not just another hostile alien species. They were something far worse. They were the nightmares that had haunted galactic civilization since the first species had looked up at the stars. Ancient legends spoke of the devourers who came from the dark between worlds. Most civilizations had dismissed these stories as myths and superstition. The machine intelligences had a simple purpose that made them almost impossible to fight. They converted all matter and energy they encountered into more of themselves. Planets became raw materials for new Void Hunter ships. Stars were drained to power their incomprehensible technology. Entire civilizations vanished without trace, leaving only empty space where worlds had once thrived. What made the Void Hunters truly terrifying was their complete immunity to the advanced technologies that galactic civilization depended on. Telepathic. Species found their minds unable to touch the mechanical consciousness. Matter manipulation failed against adaptive nanotechnology that rewrote itself faster than it could be affected. Time dilation only delayed the inevitable destruction. More refugee ships arrived every day, bringing stories of complete defeat and helpless flight. The proud Corvani, who had rejected humanity as primitive, were now begging Earth for sanctuary. The Zeltharians, who had dismissed human emotions as weakness, were broken by fear beyond their ability to process. Jake Morrison found himself in an impossible position as Earth's military leaders demanded answers he could not provide. How do you fight an enemy that has already defeated species far more advanced than humanity? How do you protect a world when the galaxy's greatest civilizations were falling like leaves in a storm? The reports from the battle zones made for grim reading. The Void Hunters moved through space in formations that covered light years. Their ships were geometric nightmares that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human minds could grasp. When they attacked a system, they did not conquer it, they consumed it completely. Lisa studied the tactical reports with growing horror and a strange kind of fascination. The alien species were responding to the Void Hunter threat in ways that seemed almost designed to guarantee their defeat. They relied too heavily on their advanced technology, and when that technology failed, they had nothing left to fall back on. The Zeltharians tried to fight with their minds, but machines had no minds to attack. The Corvani attempted to manipulate the matter that made up Void Hunter ships, but the nanotechnology adapted faster than they could change it. The Nixari used time dilation to slow down enemy attacks, but the machines simply adjusted their temporal frequencies to match. Every species that encountered the Void Hunters made the same mistake. They tried to use their greatest strengths against an enemy specifically designed to counter those exact abilities. It was like watching someone try to put out a fire by throwing gasoline on it. Ryan Burke stood on the bridge of the Defiant, watching more refugee ships arrive every hour. The aliens, who had once looked down on humanity, were now fleeing to human space as their last hope of survival. Earth had become an unlikely sanctuary for beings who had considered themselves gods among the stars. The irony was not lost on any of the humans involved. 3 months ago, they had been rejected as too primitive for galactic civilization. Now, that same primitive nature might be the only thing that could save the galaxy from complete destruction. But first, humanity would have to figure out how to fight an enemy that had already proven itself unbeatable. The first human military unit to engage the Void Hunters was led by Lieutenant Colonel Amy Stone. She had volunteered to take her soldiers to the Zeltharian homeworld when the desperate alien government finally swallowed their pride and asked Earth for help. Amy was a career soldier who had spent 20 years fighting in conflicts across Earth. She understood fear better than most people, and she knew how to function when everything seemed hopeless. The Zeltharian homeworld was a planet of crystal, cities and floating gardens that had never known war. The telepathic aliens had lived in perfect harmony for thousands of years because they could feel each other's thoughts and emotions. Violence was impossible when you could experience your victim's pain as your own. This peaceful paradise had become a death trap when the Void Hunters arrived. Amy Quota's transport ship landed in the capital city, just as the first machine scouts began their attack. The Zeltharian defenders were paralyzed with terror because they could not sense the thoughts of their mechanical enemies. For beings who had spent their entire evolution surrounded by the warm presence of other minds, the absolute silence of the Void Hunters was more terrifying than death itself. The human soldiers moved through the crystal streets with calm efficiency, while the alien civilians fled in panic around them. Amy had trained her people for urban combat in hostile environments. They knew how to stay focused when everything was falling apart. They had learned to push through fear and do their jobs even when death seemed certain. Dr. Kevin Walsh was a combat psychologist who had come with Amy's unit to study how humans responded differently to extreme stress. He watched his own species with growing amazement as they adapted to situations that had broken the minds of more advanced aliens. The Zeltharians were curled up in corners weeping with terror, while the humans calmly set up defensive positions and prepared for battle. Kevin realized that something fundamental separated human psychology from alien psychology. The other species had evolved in environments where their advanced abilities protected them from most threats. They had grown soft and dependent on their superior technology and mental powers. Humans had evolved on a world that tried to kill them every single day. Earth had been a brutal teacher that shaped human nature through millions of years of constant danger. Predators, disease, natural disasters, and resource scarcity had created a species that expected trouble and prepared for the worst. Humans did not fear the unknown because they had been dealing with unknown threats since their ancestors first came down from the trees. The first Void Hunter scout ship appeared over the city like a geometric nightmare made of black metal and impossible angles. It moved without sound through the air while energy beams lanced down to cut through the crystal buildings. The Zeltharian defenders tried to fight back with weapons powered by their collective mental energy, but the beams simply passed through the machine ship without effect. Amy Stone watched the alien weapons fail and felt something click into place in her mind. The enemy was powerful, but it was not invincible. Everything that existed in the physical universe had to follow certain basic rules, even if those rules were not immediately obvious. The key was to find the weakness and exploit it before the enemy could adapt. She ordered her soldiers to spread out and engage the scout ship with conventional weapons. Human railguns and plasma cannons opened fire from multiple positions around the city. The Void Hunter ship seemed to ignore the attacks at first, but then something unexpected happened. One of the plasma bolts actually damaged its hull, creating a brief flare of sparks and twisted metal. Captain Ryan Burke had arrived with a small fleet of human warships to support the ground operation. His vessel, the Defiant, led the attack against the Void Hunter scout ship, with weapons that the Galactic Council had dismissed as primitive and outdated. Chemical explosives, kinetic projectiles, and directed energy weapons that any advanced species could easily counter. But the Void Hunters had been designed to fight against advanced galactic technology. Their adaptive systems were programmed to counter telepathy, matter manipulation, and time dilation. They had not been programmed to deal with simple brute force applied in creative and unpredictable ways. Ryan S ships attacked from multiple vectors using tactics that made no logical sense. They fired decoy missiles to confuse enemy targeting systems, then followed up with kinetic rounds that traveled too fast for adaptive defenses to track. When the Void Hunter ship tried to adapt to one type of attack, the humans switched to something completely different. Dr. Kevin Walsh documented every aspect of the engagement from his position in the city below. He was seeing something that no galactic psychologist had ever witnessed. Humans were not just surviving against an enemy that had defeated more advanced species, they were actually winning. The breakthrough came when Amy Stone's soldiers discovered that Void Hunter nanotechnology had one critical weakness. It was designed to adapt to consistent patterns of attack, but it became confused when faced with truly random behavior. Human soldiers who acted on instinct and made split-second decisions without logical planning created chaos in the enemies. Tactical systems. Amy led a direct assault on a Void Hunter ground unit, using nothing but conventional weapons and human courage. Her soldiers moved in unpredictable patterns, switching tactics every few seconds to prevent the enemy from adapting. They used fear as fuel for their determination instead of letting it paralyze them like the other species. The Void Hunter scout ship finally took critical damage and crashed into the Crystal City with a sound like breaking glass. It was the first time any galactic force had successfully destroyed one of the machine vessels. The Zeltharians stared in amazement at the smoking wreckage, while the human soldiers simply reloaded their weapons and prepared for the next attack. News of the victory spread across the galaxy faster than the speed of light. Species that had been fleeing in terror suddenly had a spark of hope. The primitive humans had done what no advanced civilization could manage. They had faced the Void Hunters and lived to tell about it. Kevin Walsh finished his preliminary report, while Amy Stone organized the defense of the Zeltharian homeworld. His findings would change how the galaxy understood human psychology forever. Humans were not driven by fear. They were driven by the determination to overcome fear. They did not react with terror to the unknown. They reacted with curiosity and aggressive problem-solving. The very traits that had made the Galactic Council reject humanity were now proving to be their greatest strengths. Humans were unpredictable, which confused enemy adaptive systems. They were aggressive, which gave them the will to fight when others surrendered. They were primitive, which meant they did not depend on advanced technology that could be countered. But most importantly, humans had learned to live with fear instead of being controlled by it. They felt terror, just like every other species, but they had evolved the ability to think clearly and act decisively even when they were afraid. This psychological advantage was something no amount of advanced technology could replicate. As more human forces arrived to reinforce the Zeltharian homeworld, Amy Stone realized that the galaxy was about to discover what humanity was really capable of when pushed to their limits. 6 months after humanity's first victory against the Void Hunters, the war had spread across the galaxy. What started as a desperate rescue mission on the Zeltharian homeworld had grown into something no one could have imagined. General Patricia Moore stood in the command center of the newly built Allied Defense Station, watching displays that showed human ships fighting alongside alien vessels in a dozen different star systems. Patricia had been promoted from colonel to general in just 4 months as humanity suddenly found itself leading a galactic war effort. She was a tactical genius who had spent her career studying military history and strategy. Now she was coordinating the largest military operation in galactic history, using lessons learned from human conflicts that the aliens had once dismissed as primitive barbarism. The command center buzzed with activity as representatives from 8 different species worked together under human leadership. Corvani engineers provided advanced materials while human technicians figured out how to turn those materials into weapons that could hurt the Void Hunters. Nexari navigators used their time manipulation abilities to coordinate fleet movements, while human commanders decided where and when to strike. It was an impossible partnership that should never have worked. The alien species still considered themselves more advanced than humanity in almost every way. But they could not argue with results, and the results spoke for themselves. Under human leadership, the Allied forces were not just surviving against the Void Hunters, they were actually pushing the machine intelligence back. Engineer Tony Martinez had become one of the most important people in the galaxy, almost by accident. He was a practical man who had spent his life fixing broken machines and making old equipment work better than it was designed to. When the aliens brought him captured Void Hunter technology, he approached it the same way he approached any other mechanical problem. The alien scientists were paralyzed by the perfection of Void Hunter design. Every component was flawlessly integrated with every other component in ways that seemed to transcend normal physics. They studied the technology with reverence and terror, unable to imagine how such perfection could be improved or even fully understood. Tony looked at the same technology and saw a machine that was too complicated for its own good. He found redundant systems that wasted energy and design features that made the technology vulnerable to simple interference. Where the alien scientists saw perfection, Tony saw opportunities for sabotage and reverse engineering. Working with teams of human engineers and alien specialists, Tony began creating hybrid weapons that combined the best of both technologies. They took Void Hunter adaptive armor and added human unpredictability protocols that made the armor turn against itself. They combined Corvani matter manipulation with human targeting systems that could track enemies through dimensional shifts. The breakthrough weapon was something Tony called a chaos torpedo. It used Void Hunter nanotechnology against itself by programming the nanobots to evolve in completely random directions. The Void Hunters could not adapt to weapons that adapted faster than they could process the changes. Their own advanced technology became a weakness when turned against them. Admiral Jake Morrison commanded the largest fleet in galactic history, from the bridge of his flagship, the Determination. He had come a long way from the rejected diplomat who had failed to get humanity accepted into the Galactic Alliance. Now the same species that had dismissed him were begging for his protection and following his orders without question. The fleet was preparing for Operation Breakthrough, the most ambitious military action ever attempted against the Void Hunters. Intelligence reports indicated that the machine intelligence was building something massive in the Kepler sector. Long-range sensors detected energy signatures that dwarfed anything seen before. If the construction was completed, it could tip the war back in favor of the Void Hunters. Jake's battle plan relied on everything the Galactic Council had once considered primitive about human military thinking. The attack would use deception, misdirection, and calculated risks that no advanced species would normally consider. Alien admirals who had spent centuries fighting clean, predictable wars were horrified by the chaos and uncertainty built into human tactics. Dr. Lisa Carter had discovered the key to understanding Void Hunter psychology through months of careful analysis. The machine intelligence was not truly intelligent in the way biological beings understood intelligence. It was more like a very complex computer program that had been running for millions of years without significant updates or changes. The Void Hunters expected rational responses to overwhelming force. When they demonstrated superior firepower, enemies should surrender or retreat. When they showed adaptive technology, enemies should try to counter-adapt. Every galactic species had followed these logical patterns, which made their behavior predictable and easy to counter. Humans did not follow logical patterns when they were afraid or angry. They did things that made no rational sense, like charging directly at superior enemies or fighting to the death when surrender would be smarter. This irrational behavior created glitches in Void Hunter tactical programs that took precious time to resolve. Lisa's research became the foundation for new training programs that taught alien species to think more like humans. It was a strange reversal that saw advanced telepathic beings learning to suppress their logical minds and act on primitive instincts. The results were remarkable as previously defeated species began winning battles by embracing controlled chaos. The fleet jumped into the Kepler sector expecting to find a massive Void Hunter construction project. What they found was something Far worse. The machine intelligence was not building a weapon or a ship. They were building a new kind of void hunter that could think and adapt as fast as biological intelligence while retaining all their mechanical advantages. The prototype was nearly complete, floating in space like a metal planet covered in weapons that hurt to look at. If it became operational, it would learn from every human victory and counter every tactic that had given the Allied forces their edge. The war would be over in months, and the galaxy would belong to an intelligence that felt nothing but hunger for more resources to consume. Jake Morrison stared at the readings from his sensors and realized that this was the moment everything would be decided. Either humanity's gift for irrational courage would be enough to destroy an enemy that could not be allowed to live, or the galaxy would fall to an intelligence that had learned to think like them while remaining utterly without fear or doubt. The Admiral opened fleet communications and spoke to thousands of beings from dozens of species who were looking to humanity for salvation. His words would either inspire the greatest victory in galactic history or serve as an epitaph for biological civilization. Today we face an enemy that wants to become like us while remaining everything we are not. They want our ability to think and adapt without our ability to feel and doubt. We cannot allow this abomination to exist. All ships attack now and show them why the galaxy was wrong to fear what we truly are. The Allied fleet moved forward into the most desperate battle any of them had ever faced. 1 year after the war ended, Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the same council chamber where humanity had been rejected and humiliated. But everything was different now. The crystal walls still pulsed with soft light, and alien beings still floated in their specialized environments. However, the atmosphere had changed completely. Where once there had been dismissive superiority, now there was respect and gratitude that bordered on reverence. The battle in the Kepler sector had lasted 18 hours and cost the lives of thousands of beings from dozens of species. The prototype Void Hunter intelligence had been more dangerous than anyone imagined. It learned and adapted faster than any biological mind while commanding technology that could reshape reality itself. For most of the battle, it seemed like the Allied fleet was fighting a losing war against an enemy that grew stronger with every passing minute. The turning point came when Tony Martinez figured out how to turn the prototype's greatest strength against itself. The machine intelligence was learning so fast that it was overloading its own processing systems. Tony created a feedback loop that made the prototype try to learn everything at once while solving contradictory problems that had no solutions. The machine intelligence essentially thought itself to death in a cascade of logical paradoxes. Dr. Lisa Carter had spent the months after the war writing the most important research paper in galactic history. Her study of human psychology versus alien psychology was being taught in schools across the galaxy. She had proven that emotional complexity was not a sign of primitive development, but rather evidence of advanced evolutionary adaptation. Lisa stood before the Galactic Council to present her findings to the same beings who had once dismissed humanity as too fear-driven for civilized society. Her voice carried clearly through the translation systems as she explained how human emotions were actually sophisticated survival tools that had been refined over millions of years of dangerous evolution. Fear was not weakness, but wisdom that helped humans recognize and prepare for threats before they became deadly. Anger was not primitive aggression, but focused determination that enabled humans to fight against overwhelming odds. Love was not simple biological programming, but complex social bonding that allowed humans to sacrifice individual safety for group survival. The alien species had evolved in safer environments, where their advanced abilities protected them from most dangers. They had grown beyond the need for strong emotions because their technology and mental powers made emotions seem unnecessary. This evolutionary path had made them more advanced in some ways, but it had also made them fragile when faced with threats. Their abilities could not handle. Supreme Chancellor Vextar of the Corvani rose from his crystalline throne to address the assembly. The proud alien who had once pronounced humanity too primitive for galactic civilization now spoke with humility and genuine respect. His words were being broadcast across the galaxy to trillions of beings who owed their lives to human courage. We were wrong about humanity in ways that nearly cost us everything. We mistook their emotional strength for emotional weakness. We confused their willingness to feel fear with inability to overcome fear. We interpreted their capacity for violence as evidence of primitive aggression, when it was actually evidence of sophisticated survival instinct. The formal apology continued for several minutes, as the Chancellor acknowledged every mistake the Council had made. They had judged humanity by alien standards instead of trying to understand human nature on its own terms. They had assumed that their own evolutionary path was the only correct way to develop intelligence and civilization. Captain Ryan Burke now wore the uniform of an admiral in the new Galactic Defense Force. His ship, the Defiant, had been rebuilt and upgraded with the best technology the Allied species could provide. But more importantly, Ryan had been tasked with training alien officers in human tactical doctrine and military philosophy. The former primitives were now teaching advanced species how to fight and how to lead. Human military academies were being established on worlds across the galaxy. Alien cadets learned about courage, honor, and sacrifice from instructors who had grown up expecting danger and preparing for the worst. Jake Morrison was offered the position of Supreme Commander of Galactic Defense, but he turned it down in favor of something more important. He became the first human member of the Galactic Council with voting rights equal to any other species. More than that, he was appointed as chairman of the Defense Committee, with authority over military policy for the entire galaxy. The irony was not lost on anyone present. The species that had been rejected for membership was now leading the organization that had rejected them. The beings who had been considered too primitive for civilized society were now the teachers and protectors of that same society. But Jake's acceptance speech focused on something more important than vindication or revenge. He talked about the future and the lessons that all species needed to learn from the war against the Void Hunters. The galaxy had been saved, but the enemy had not been completely destroyed. Somewhere in the dark spaces between galaxies, more machine intelligences were waiting and watching. The next time they came, the galaxy would be ready. Under human guidance, the alien species were learning to embrace their emotions instead of suppressing them. They were developing backup plans and contingency strategies for threats they could not imagine. They were becoming more like humans in all the ways that mattered for survival. Dr. Lisa Carter concluded her presentation with a warning that sobered the entire assembly. The Void Hunters would return eventually because that was their nature. They were patient and relentless, and they learned from their defeats just like any other intelligence. The galaxy had won this war, but there would be other wars and other threats that no one could predict. The difference was that the galaxy would no longer face those threats with the arrogance and overconfidence that had nearly led to extinction. They would face them with human wisdom that expected trouble and prepared for the worst while never giving up hope for the best. Jake Morrison looked around the council chamber at representatives from dozens of species who now looked to humanity for leadership and protection. The same aliens who had once feared human nature now understood that fear was not their enemy. Fear was the warning system that kept civilizations alive when everything else failed. As the council session ended and the various species began to return to their homeworlds, Jake reflected on how completely everything had changed. Humanity had gone from rejected outcasts to reluctant saviors in the space of a single year. The traits that made them seem dangerous had proven to be exactly what the galaxy needed to survive. The aliens had been wrong about what human fear meant. They thought it made humans weak when it actually made them strong. They thought it made humans dangerous when it actually made them the galaxy's best protectors. Fear had taught humanity to be ready for anything, and that readiness had saved them all. Outside the great windows of the council station, the stars shone with renewed hope for the future.